What's holding you back in your ministry or in your church? What would you say was your greatest need right now? I think if I surveyed a number of leaders, about 90% of them would say resources is their challenge, and specifically people resources, and then more specifically, good people resources. As I talk with leaders around Australia and in other places, this need is often expressed to me like this. We have people, but they're really only 3 to 5 out of 10. We need some 10 out of 10s. We need trained people. And sometimes I get asked, hey, you've got a decent sized church. Can you give me some people that can help me? Unfortunately, some pastors and leaders have grown up in a way that they see larger churches as a bit of a fishing pool, a resource bank for them to withdraw from. I think it's sad, you could even say it's a little tragic, that some of the biggest churches around the world, indeed the biggest churches in Australia, look to other churches to find senior leadership rather than from their own ranks. Now, I often sort of talk to senior leaders about that and say, well, why is that the case? I mean, you've got thousands of people in your church, potentially. There should be someone there who could come through or could rise up to being a leader. Why do you have to go to other churches to seek your senior leadership or a replacement senior pastor? The answers that I get from people are twofold. Mostly they say, well, we need people now. We can't wait. We really have a pressing need now for an executive pastor, or our church is looking for a replacement senior pastor now. The other kind of response I get is, well, we tried training, but then we trained people and we paid a lot of money and then they left the church. So it's too risky. We'd rather just get, a package that we know, was already trained. I understand those questions, and I've probably said those things myself in the past, but I think the first one is short-sighted, and the second one just lacks faith. Jesus told his disciples to go and to baptize and to teach and to make disciples. That was the big thing that he wanted his believers to do, and particularly that falls upon the leadership in churches to actually make sure that that's happening throughout their congregations. At another time, Jesus said to his disciples, the harvest is great, but the workers are few. Pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send workers into the harvest, into the fields. Tragically, I think with most pastors bemoaning their lack of people resources, it seems that the art of developing leaders from the harvest is somewhat lost. So what are we to do? Well, I always go back to the teaching of Jesus, and looking at those two verses that I quoted just a moment ago, I think the first thing that we need to do as Christian leaders and as church leaders, whether we're pastors or lay leaders or elders or deacons or board members, the first thing we need to do is pray. We need to pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send people. The scripture tells us that Paul planted, Apollos watered, but God sent the increase. So this has to be a partnership with God. Just as a sidebar, I think if we're not asking God for resources, if we're not leaning heavily on him for that, if we're not asking him, send people along, then I suspect maybe he won't. I think if we're not asking God for our churches to grow, to send people to us, and if we're not planning to look after them, maybe that growth won't come. So we need to pray. The second thing that we need to do is we need to train people as Jesus instructed us to do, as he spoke to his first disciples. We need to teach them everything that he had commanded them and then send them out. Today I want to focus on this second one, the concept of Jesus saying that we must disciple people. We must make disciples, not just believers, but we must be responsible for creating followers of Jesus that are well trained and who can themselves rise up to leadership to be part of the church of Jesus and to carry it forward. because raising up leaders is future-proofing the church, and that's what I believe we should be about. So today I'm going to give you a very simple thing that we've developed here at Gateway, which is a 5-step plan for developing leaders. As they say, it's not rocket science, but as I speak to many pastors, very few people do all 5 things. They major on the first couple and then it weakens off. And I think that then leads them to not getting the people that they feel that they need or they require in their church. So the first step in developing leaders is recruitment. You know, God says, ask me. He says, you know, pray to the Lord of the harvest. So make prayer your beginning point. And then as people come to your church, and every church has people who visit, as people who come and you get to know them, make an ask of them. Make an ask of people, because recruiting starts with asking. Many people want to help. Even the many non-Christians who come into our church here want to help. They see the vitality in the life and they go, how can I help? People want to help, but people also need to be asked. They need encouragement to step up, because they don't want to think of themselves as, well, you know, I'm here to sort of save everybody, but they want to contribute. So we need to ask people. Let me tell you the story of a CEO who came to our church at one time. We'll call him John. John was a very talented guy, very strong administrator, and had built some great companies. But when he came into the church with his wife, he found a different environment. A worshipping environment, a singing environment, a studying environment, totally foreign to how he had been raised as a business leader. And so he thought he had no contribution to make. But as we got to know John, and as we discovered some of his natural talents and eventually his spiritual gifts, we went to him and asked him to lead one of our business teams. And his response to me was, I didn't think I was needed. He couldn't naturally see the place, but as a leader, I had to be able to see people's natural place. That's what pastors do. So in asking him, he stepped up and our church benefited greatly. So what does this mean for you? Well, the focus at this point for recruitment is twofold. The first thing you need to focus on in recruitment is empowerment. You must invest in people. And of course, people matter to God. But don't just shotgun it. Don't just stick it in your newsletter or post it on a website and say, oh, we've done all we can, we've asked, but nobody came forward. You must make it personal. And particularly when it comes to the point leaders in your church, you need to understand who they are and then go and make an ask as Jesus made an ask, one-on-one. The worst thing that can happen is they could say no. But we need to recruit according to our mission and our vision. It's not just about having warm bodies in spots. We must think about, particularly for point leaders and team leaders, we must think about how they can advance the ministry, the mission and vision of the church. We need to also tell people that this is not just about doing a job. It's not just about, hey, we need this task done. And please don't put in your newsletter or tell people, we're desperate for people. That really inspires people to step up. I'm joking, it doesn't inspire them. So you need to put some inspiration out there for people and let people know this is not just about doing a task, it's about your development. This is how God will develop you as a follower. As you step up, as you serve, as you lead, these things will test people's character and heart, and it will grow them. So there's a personal development to the whole aspect of ministry, which is about empowering. We need to let them know that ministry is not just task. Ministry is about people. And of course, our job is not just to do lots and lots of ministry. Our job is to raise up leaders. The second part of recruitment is excellence. We must take a risk on people, but we've got to try and put the right person in the right place for the right purpose. At Gateway, we use a very well-known tool written by Pastor Rick Warren called SHAPE, Spiritual Gifts, Heart, Ability, Personalities, Experiences, so that we can get to understand how people are made up. And so we place people according to their design, not just our desires. And in recruiting people and trying to make it excellent, it doesn't hurt to have a bit of a process in place. a bit of an application process. So let them do something so that they can demonstrate what their gifts are. You've probably heard it said that, people are not always what they seem, so be cautious. Well, at Gateway, we've kind of gloried in turning that on its head, and we say that people are not always what they seem. They're usually more. So when you're recruiting, go on a treasure hunt, because God might surprise you with what he gives you. The second step in the process is responsibility. Ask something of people. Don't recruit people to do nothing, particularly if they're senior business leaders or they're people of capacity. Don't underwhelm them. And then you must know what you're asking of them. If you don't know what you want them to do, they won't, and they might just make it up along the way. There's a story I tell sometimes about a lady, let's call her Julie, and we asked her to lead a small group, a study group. Now, in our minds, we understood what a study group was, a Bible study, a cell group, but this is a lady who was new to the faith and had never been in a study group before. And so very quickly, that group became her platform, her audience for her to preach and teach, which was okay, but it took it in the totally wrong direction of what we were wanting. So the focus of your effort here with responsibility is twofold. We must release people to serve. We must take a risk on people. And remember, if you don't know what you want them to do, they won't necessarily know. So a job description is good, particularly the more senior the position, or if you're looking at a point or a team leader, you must have a job description which just sets the boundaries of what it is that they do and what it is that they don't do. So everybody's clear from the beginning on what happens. The second part of responsibility is not just releasing people to serve and giving them a bit of a job description, but expecting success. And this is a big thing for pastors. Many pastors and leaders can get very pulled down and weighed down by troubles and problems and experiences, and we can be a little bit sour sometimes. And sometimes we get a little bit negative. Now, I can only encourage you to pray your way through that, but when you're recruiting people, you must come with a positive attitude and expect success. And can I just say that throwing people in the deep end never works. It's a bad way to try and make people successful. We say at Gateway, we don't expect people to act like Christians until they are, and certainly leaders aren't expected to operate at a high level until they've had experience. So work people up as they get more maturity, more experience, increase their responsibility. I say work people towards a higher calling. As a sidebar, can I just say this is really important for those in our congregations who are in the millennial generation. They really need to see pathways. And as leaders and pastors, we must show them that it's not just about the task, this is about developing them into their potential and future. Because without a defined responsibility, people will climb your ladder, but they may just find it's up against the wrong wall. The third step in this process is about resources. And as I said earlier, the further we get into these steps, the less that I find pastors and leaders actually do. That most can ask people to do stuff, they can basically define it, but then when it comes to resources, their enthusiasm drags away. I think if you recruit people, you must give them the resources and the tools and the training that they need in order to accomplish everything, because we're not going to get 10 out of 10 people. We get people, and it's our role to train and disciple people into that. And can I say here that senior leaders in the church, whether you're a senior pastor, executive pastor, board member, elder, your responsibility, I believe, is to seek God for kingdom finance. If you don't have the resources, it's up to us to be on our knees and before God, constantly asking Him for the resources that are necessary. When I first came to faith, I was only a Christian about 6 months, and I was asked to lead the Sunday school in our small evangelical church. But then I discovered on the first Sunday there was no curriculum and there was no books. And when I asked around, the few teachers who remained told me that it was their responsibility to buy paper and pens and art resources to teach the children. So we were in a very poor state. So being brash and young, I went to the church board at their next meeting and told them that, we have a Sunday school here of 50 kids but no resources. And they just said, well, sorry, we have no budget for that. So I got a little bit cross with them and I said, look, no budget, no vision. We must do something. Fortunately, there was an elderly man on the board, and I think he captured what I was saying. And then later that month, I was given $1,000 for the whole year for 50 kids in Sunday school to buy the resources that were necessary. You've got to make that ask. Nobody's just going to come and give it to you. So at this point, with resourcing, the focus of your efforts should be twofold. Firstly, it's about people, not programs. A program does not save anyone. Programs are important, but people are more important. You need to tell your people that training is available. Find out what training is available, what they need. Send them to conferences, pay for them to go, buy them books so that will encourage and train them. And remember that vision harbours its own means. You know, the resources are in the harvest, Jesus said. The second thing that we do here with resources is we must budget for growth. It's not about, keeping on slashing or just adding, 2% to what was there last year. We need to think through what it is that success looks like for us. If we had all the resources we needed, what would success look like? And we need to budget for that success, not for failure, not for maintenance. At Gateway, we say we budget to grow. We don't wait to grow before we budget. The fourth step in this little teaching is what I call relationship. And as I said earlier, the further you go into this, the less time that pastors and leaders, in my experience, give to it. But we must try and keep equal weight on these things. Recruiting leaders is not just about filling job vacancies. It's about honouring the image of God in people and developing that and putting it forward. As I talk to leaders around the place, most of them tell me that the single most important factor in their development was not a great program, it was not even necessarily a great, Bible college course, it was a person. At one time, there was a person who believed in them and stood by them and mentored them and encouraged them into that position and then walked with them through their leadership training. It's about relationship. It always is and always will be. Moses had Jethro, Caleb had Joshua, Paul had Barnabas. Who are you mentoring through? Who are you creating relationship with who could become a leader? There are two aspects to this, very simple. The first aspect is friendship. The best resource you can give an emerging leader is yourself, especially with your point leaders, especially with your more senior leaders. You need to schedule regular catch-ups. I often say, make a friend, gain a leader. You must be in people's world. So friendship is the first thing. The second thing with relationship is accountability. It's not just about being nice to people and having cups of coffee. When teachers set exams, students only study what they know is going to be on the paper. Nobody goes away and goes, you know what, teach, I read these other 5 books last night because they were really interesting. They just study what's on the exam. So people only do what they're accountable for. You need to figure out what do you want to hold them to account for and let them know. Now, accountability has 2 tracks. As I said, it's not just about task, it's also about character. Now, over the years, I've used a very simple little acrostic, which is easy to remember. It's called GROW, G-R-O-W. And this is the little acrostic that I use in my head when I talk to emerging leaders and some of even our senior leaders. I follow this pattern so that I can make sure I balance people and task. The G in GROW is goals. And it means helping them to understand what are their personal goals and what are their ministry goals. What is it that they're trying to do in their general life and in their ministry life? What are their goals? The R is about the reality. Well, the question goes, well, how's it going then? How's that working for you? How are your goals going? And you can reflect and give them some perspective. Maybe they've got a great perspective on how things are going anyway, but we should ask them. The third letter in GROW is O, and that stands for options. Brainstorm with the leader about what could be done. They've usually got ideas, or they have some idea about what's going on. Maybe they don't dare to even ask, but brainstorm, add some ideas for yourself, and then help them set some priorities inside those options. And of course, the W in the GROW acrostic is willpower. Help them to make decisions and ask them, what's the next thing you're going to do? Based on what we've talked about and the options and what needs to be done, tell me what's the next step that you're going to take. And then, of course, that becomes the first point of accountability for the next meeting. The fifth and final step in this process of developing leaders that we've used for many, many years, and I think successfully, is the step of renewal. This is the real test of a leader. I think a leader must have the ability to reproduce godliness in other people, not just to get things done. And can I say here at this point, just to give you my bias, I think the key role of leaders is to raise up other healthy leaders. But often we get too busy with doing the ministry and not delegating and raising other people. So renewal, there are three aspects to this that I can tell you about. For me, firstly, it's about spiritual formation. It's guiding the spiritual development of leaders. Don't expect people, to grow themselves spiritually. You must have input into that, particularly if you see a future for them in senior leadership. And remind them that ministry is not just technocratic. It's not just about how you do things and all that sort of stuff. It's theocratic. Ministry is about serving God. It's about serving people for God. And we need to remind leaders of that because, when you're up to your knees in alligators, it's hard to remember that your goal was to drain the swamp. A good question to ask, particularly an emerging leader, is how is your soul tracking? You might need to explain what you mean by soul, but how is your soul tracking? How are you doing? And encourage them to develop a healthy mind, body and spirit, and include in that fitness, diet and rest. It's not just about doing more Bible study. It's not just about doing more prayer. Paul himself said, I beat my body so that in time I will not be disqualified from ministry. We must add that physical element and health element and diet element to who we are, or we just won't go the distance. Or if we do go the distance, we're going to peter out at the end. And I think it's our responsibility to remind emerging and developing leaders, it's not just about all the spiritual stuff. The second thing with renewal is multiplication. Spiritually healthy leaders develop spiritually healthy leaders. And a great question to ask is, who are you developing? Who is developing someone else? So do you have an apprentice? And who are they working with? So you get this third tier of leadership happening. It doesn't just stop with you. When you stop energy, it doesn't stop. That leader is being developed and they're developing someone else. And maybe, if you're fortunate, they're also developing someone else, and so it goes. It's about multiplying your impact. And the final thing is celebration. We must plan to celebrate the victories because you know what the goals are and what the leader's trying to get to. Make sure that you encourage them. You privately encourage them and you give public affirmation to what they're doing when they succeed. It's very, very important that not only for that leader, but the church sees that this person is successful in ministry. Now, can I also add that we need to grieve their failures? If you've been in ministry as long as me, you've had too many failures to remember. And I haven't always had someone encourage me through that. But I know how important it is. And I say grieve the failures and then allow them, give them permission to do that and then to move on, pick themselves up and to go again. So there's the 5 steps: recruitment, responsibility, resources, relationship and renewal. I pray that as you put this into practice, that you will actually start to gain the leaders that your church needs and you will see your church grow as God wants it to grow. God bless you.